Hi, Dr. Carol Blaney here. Today I'd like to go over a chapter in a book I wrote called Aspie's Guide to Planet Earth. In the chapter on Brain Design 101, I gave an overview of some of the research that has been done on the Asperger's brain in some of the recent decades. Now, some of the characteristics of the Asperger's brain is that they crave knowledge and they're fascinated about learning as much as possible about their favorite topics. They can learn a great deal at once, and only if they're passionate about the topic. If you're able to feel extreme passion towards your work and towards helping others, and especially passion towards saving or helping the planet, you as an Asperger's will be motivated to do the research and be motivated to do the research. And you'll spend endless hours doing it. If you're an Asperger's, you see more and you ignore less. You see amazing things that other people don't see. It may make it appear that you can read minds, but you might be reading facial microexpressions that pass by in a millisecond. This is a general truth about Asperger's or autistic people, the ones that have the ability to see things at a higher frame rate. Many Asperger's do have these typical characteristics that I'll be discussing today. So when I say that you, an Asperger, have these characteristics and you don't have it, just know that other people in your group or in the Asperger group or in the autistic group may have these amazing traits. If you're an Asperger, you're a good systematizer. You can recognize patterns and see things in new ways. You can systematize information quite easily. This is something that you love to do. So let's lump all of these Asperger skills into one bulk term, which I'll call systematization. I'm going to call it by the Greek letter sigma for systematization. And if you plot this on an XY plot and you put sigma or systematization on the x-axis, imagine that in your mind, okay? So close your eyes and imagine a whale-sized graph, a huge graph. That will be easy to remember. And on the y-axis, we'll note that in a minute, but on the x-axis will be the Asperger's main skill of systematization. Now, can you think of what the main neurotypical skill is? I'm sure most Aspies can say what it is, right? I'll just answer you. It's social skills. And the Aspies may think that these social skills are incomprehensible social skills. But they're very comprehensible to the neurotypical because neurotypicals are typically all alike and they think alike and they greet each other the same way and they dress the same and they watch the same TV shows and they watch the same news and I'm exaggerating. But to the Asperger, it seems like that because the majority of the people, which are over 90%, are neurotypical. That's the definition of neurotypical, is you're the average brain that develops in the average common way. The vast majority of people, the general Joe Schmoes that you run into at work and at school and everywhere, these people have social skills. Now, Asperger's have social skills too, but these social skills are a little bit different because they have a different brain structure. For example, Asperger's will tend to always tell the truth, and that is a social nuance of the Asperger brain. So for the purposes of today's discussion and for my book, I'm talking about North American culture because that is what I'm familiar with. And right now the book is written in English, so I will be addressing United States and Canada. Now, systematization versus social skills. Now, social skills will be plotted on the y-axis for the main skill of the neurotypical. And so we're going to call that S, little s, for social skills. So we've got social skills up here on the y-axis and systematization skills on the x-axis. So the neurotypical skill and the Asperger skill. Now, let's picture someone who's very good at both skills. They would be like a superhero, right? So that would be high sigma and high S. So we would put a little star up there. So since these people are good at both skills, there are superheroes. And that's what we should all strive for. Okay, now let's just look at the systematization skill for the Asperger's. This skill was recognized back in the 1940s when a German pediatrician named Hans Asperger began recognizing a certain personality trait in some of his younger male patients. And he called these young male patients his little professors. This is because they were all extremely curious about how the world works, and they were keen systematizers. They were good at spotting patterns among their surroundings. Now, you need to be able to do this well if you want to systematize anything. They were often good with language as well. These little professors were not so good at those silly tests designed by neurotypicals. What are they called? Theory of mind tests. Now, it's understandable that they weren't good at neurotypical theory of mind tests because these little professors had a different neurotype. They were Aspergers. And they weren't designed to think like neurotypicals. Therefore, they don't see the world like neurotypicals. Therefore, they aren't expected to answer theory of mind tests filled with questions aimed at neurotypicals, designed by neurotypicals. Okay, we don't need to discuss that anymore. I diverge. So Hans Asperger and many others nowadays believe that you need a little bit of Aspergerness in your traits in order to be a successful scientist. And this trait is very needed nowadays. You need to be a good systematizer, and you need good language skills, which is one of the traits of an Asperger's, in order to communicate your scientific findings in an efficient way to others. All scientists need to be able to do that. So there have been experts that studied Asperger's in the past, did huge studies, and came to conclusions about different famous people being Asperger's. Marie Curie was one of these people. And she saw unobvious connections between her experimental data and Einstein's theory of relativity. She discovered that she was converting matter into energy because she realized that her data agreed with Einstein's equation E equals mc squared. Madame Curie found that the mass lost from her starting material was indeed possessing energy that equaled to the energy of the emitted X-rays. So, because of her, today we have a much better understanding of nuclear power. Now, Albert Einstein, another Asperger and Nobel Prize winner, just like Madame Curie was a Nobel Prize winner, saw many unobvious things. He built many systems of ways to view the world. Take the photoelectric effect. That's where he won his Nobel Prize. He noticed oddities in the data. And so he discovered or proposed quantized energy states. And this view of the world is the way we see it today. He also viewed the universe at a newer, higher level using general and special theories of relativity. There's also many artists and musicians that have proposed and created works of art and music that are Asperger's, like Mozart and Beethoven, for example. So in my book, I do outline several famous Asperger's people from our history. And they all have good language skills, which, as I said, are useful for recording and sharing complex information to others. So you do need good language skills. If you don't, you're typically categorized as autistic. So we've been discussing the sigma axis to this point, systematization skills. And I gave you two examples, Albert Einstein and Marie Curie. Then there's Paul Dirac, who was thought to be an Asperger's, and he made huge contributions to atomic theory in the 1930s. And Marie Juliette Curie, I'm not saying that right, but he made very big contributions to subatomic particles as well. Then there was Charles Darwin, who proposed the radical theory of evolution back in the mid-1800s, and a thought process that we still use today, although it has been revised with epigenetics. That was way back in 1859. And then Henry Ford in the early 1900s invented the automobile, another Asperger. Jim Henson is thought to be an Asperger, and he, of course, made us love Kermit the Frog. Charles Schulz, who did the Peanuts cartoon, saw the world in a very different and unique way and was an Asperger's. Many people believe Bill Gates is an Asperger because of his stimming behavior in meetings, but he founded Microsoft, and he's one of the world's best philanthropists. So let's now take a deep breath and empty our minds and merge with the cosmos. All right, now we're going to go to a different axis, the social skills. So we just finished talking about the systematization axis, and now we're going to go to the y-axis in socialization. Now, a simpleton's word for this label is manners, following the customs of your land. So we're going to talk about manners, social skills, little s on the y-axis. It's the measure of a person's social skills. How well that person is able to automatically read another person's body language and body gestures, how well you can get neurotypical jokes, how well you know and practice the local manners and dress patterns of your culture, how well you can get along with and are liked by others, how well you fit in to the current earthling neurotypical culture and society. This is the planet that we live on, Earth, and so this is a culture, 90% of which we must understand, especially here in America and Canada, which I'm discussing. There's a predominant culture of neurotypicals. It would behoove the Asperger to understand this culture so that we cannot insult them and also understand their sometimes intriguing and confusing actions. If the Asperger can develop decent manners, then things will go much smoother for everyone. Now, as I've touched upon a minute ago, all the earthling neurotypicals have what I call the baseline brain, which is smaller, less powerful, and less interconnected than the Asperger brain. Now, these are scientifically measured facts, which we'll discuss in depth in a moment. The neurotypicals have what I call pre-installed software, which the Aspergers lack in varying degrees. So if you look at the theory of evolution, you can look at evolution of the brain, how the brain changed versus time. The neurotypical brain is very skilled at socialization. Take jokes, for instance. Neurotypicals get each other's jokes because their brains all see the world similarly in big sweeping generalizations due to their filtering capability. They have similar types of brain compartments and similar types of interconnections between compartments. This is vital to know. Because of this, they often see a binary world. For example, they might only see two types of humans, the in crowd versus the weirdos, the good guys versus the outsiders. And I'll go so far as to suggest that neurotypicals even think that their existing shared operating system and software provides them with absolute truth, which of course are not absolute and are not necessarily true. But it's good to know that they believe that they're absolutely true, so that you, the Asperger, can know how strong their opinions will be if you want to dispute them. So you need to be prepared if you want to discount their opinions. You need to know what you're up against. Aspies will be so eager to point out that the neurotypical is mistaken, but please don't do this, because the neurotypicals are completely unable to fathom any new concept that challenges his or her pre-installed software. I am talking in generalities. Of course, there's many neurotypicals that work hard to be open-minded and develop their minds and develop skills by studying other cultures. And perhaps they study Zen or other forms of spirituality. Perhaps they study the Asperger brain, and they see that neurotypes are very different from each other. But I'm talking about the common person that you'll run into in the real world. A cop, person behind the counter, someone at work, your boss, colleague. So the neurotypicals that are open-minded are rare individuals because they've spent a lifetime rewiring and enhancing their brains. Because of this involuntary brain stubbornness of the neurotypicals, I beseech all Aspergers to view neurotypicals as lovable puppies who need kind help in surviving on our planet, so they might give it given a chance to naturally evolve to a point where they have compassion for all people and for the planet's health. Do not overlook that these neurotypicals are the vast majority and that you Aspergers are a very small, about 5 to 10%. I'm approximating. The neurotypicals sense that this planet is their home. Even if the properties and advantages and gifts of the Aspergers were revealed in full to all neurotypicals, they would still probably only be able to see Aspergers as a guest here and not as incumbents. You would still have to earn your welcome. You would still have to abide by certain manners, certain legal rules. This is a pre-programmed limitation of the neurotypical mind, of the majority mind. It's not good or it's not bad. It's just the way it is. And any neurotypical that's listening to me now is probably thinking, well, I'm not going to say it. Now, let's return to the graph. Let's go back to our whale-sized diagram. If I were to tell you that among the earthly neurotypicals, the women were generally better at manners and socialization than the males for the purpose of holding the tribe together and raising the young, and if I were to tell you that the men were better at systematization for organizing the hunt for meat, where do you suppose the neurotypical females and the neurotypical males would be on the graph? If this is the socialization skill, the females will be in the upper left-hand corner, right up here, because they're not so high in systematization, but they're high in socialization. There's always exceptions, of course. But the women are good at manners, and so high S, low sigma. Now, what about the neurotypical men? Where would they be on our plot? Well, they would be worse at the manners, better at systematization, maybe somewhere in the middle, just in general. That's because they're better at systematization than the neurotypical women, but not so good at manners. I mean, what's the stereotypical image of a man? You know, dresses sloppy, you know, doesn't really listen very well, but he's good at math. He's good at systematization. Again, these are just generalizations. We can teach ourselves to do anything we want to. But if you don't work hard at developing yourself, these are where you'll fall on the plot, on average, if you're neurotypical. You know, I mean, I sure know a lot of neurotypical women that are good at systematizing. A lot, you know. So you just have to work at it, you know. And plus, some are born with it, you know. I was, and I'm just half and half, you know. Okay. Let's look at the Aspergers now. The sigma axis. Where do you think the Aspergers are on this graph? Where are the males? Well, right. They're in the lower right-hand corner because they suck at manners, right? Unless they study manners. But they're really good at systematization. Look at Bill Gates. I mean, he's not following the social rules because he's sitting there at the meeting rocking back and forth, but he is a darned good systematizer. And a philanthropist. He wants to help the planet, you know? More than the normal person, right? Or the average person. So, there Bill Gates is on the lower right-hand corner. Now, where are the Aspie females? Right, upper right-hand corner. Right up there with the superheroes. Yay! Why are they up here? Because they're good. Why are the females up here? Because they're good at systematization and they're better at manners than the male. Now, they may not all be right up here, but they might be kind of like, you know, not quite as good at manners as the regular woman, but a lot better at systematization. So the regular woman's over here, and then the Asperger woman is less good at manners, but just as good at systematization as the males. And sometimes more, sometimes less, but definitely over here. And that's like, the upper right-hand corner is the superhero region. Now, why do Asperger women have good manners? Well, I'll try to explain it in the way that it was explained in this book called Pretending to be Normal. This book is a really cool book, and it explains why female Aspies might have better manners and better social skills than men. Aspie girls are in a culture of women, and women tend to take care of each other. They're not so competitive like men. Think about it. They have good manners, they have good social skills, they include each other more, they're less competitive, so they're not really going to compete with each other. They'll pull in an Aspie girl and be nice to them and advise them on clothing. So even though I'm more borderline Aspie, I have to say that I really relied on my girlfriends to help me dress properly when I was younger. It's funny being half Asperger's because when you're around neurotypicals, they think you're Asperger's, and when you're around Asperger's, they think you're neurotypical. So my point is, though, is that, okay, let me give some examples. When I was growing up, I started sewing clothes when I was in 5th grade. And I was really like in 4th grade because I was a year ahead of everyone else. So when I was in 6th grade, I started asking some of my good friends which dresses looked better than others because my sister was bugging me about looking weird. And so she was very honest with me And she told me that one of my dresses looked like a clown because it was this bright plaid. So then I was hooked, man. I needed to understand why my clothes were weird. So I asked several friends and my sister why every single dress was either accepted or not. And I started to systematize the rules of dress and style and fashion. So I took this systematization and turned it into an advantage, and I became the fashionista of my high school, and I designed all my own clothes, and everybody wanted me to sew for them. So in a way, you can learn manners and even be better than anyone else, because if you're a good systematizer, you can learn the manners. Well, so females do have these social skills. All this said, I think Asperger women need some respect and appreciation. Yeah. So let's talk about Asperger's women for a minute. Not only are they good at socialization and systematizing, but they also can often make the best mother you'll find anywhere, because not only do they respect their child as a whole human being, they will protect that child fiercely, and they'll do a lot of research into feeding the child properly and getting the child the right and proper care and the best education. They'll systematize raising their child, and the child will therefore get the best that technology and research has to offer. It's time to take a deep breath and merge ourselves with the cosmind once again, and to feel our bodies fully. Remove our chi from our mind and put it into our body for a moment to replenish our health. When a neurotypical looks at a group of trees, his left temporal lobe is pre-programmed to throw out the details that are irrelevant with respect to survival of their primate tribe. And all that neurotypical is presented with is forest. On the other hand, when you and Asperger see the same group of trees, you will see much, much more. This is because your left temporal lobe filters a lot less. In other words, the filters are pretty much removed. Your filter lets in more information. In fact, you actually have the ability to open up your left temporal lobe or close it down at will. It's like a volume knob. You get to decide how much you see, as well as decide consciously, not unconsciously, what you see and what you don't, what you pay attention to and what you don't pay attention to. In a nutshell, your brain is such that you get to decide what data to keep and what data to discard. And you have the capacity to do so manually and consciously, instead of subconsciously and automatically. So when the Asperger sees the same bunch of trees that the neurotypical sees, you curiously pore over the data. You see patterns and relations. You skillfully systematize these patterns to create a new holistic vision of those trees. Think about it. You look at each tree and see the entire history of that tree on Earth, as well as its interactions with the rest of the trees and the ecosystem and the weather patterns, and on and on. The Asperger sees the entire universe in a single tree. It takes somewhat longer to process this, however. Why does it take longer, you ask? Because even though the Asperger's brain is on average 65% larger than the average size of the neurotypical's brain, you're processing so much more information, and most of it is processed consciously with the thinking part of the brain, that it just takes longer. You see, your brain, the Asperger's brain, utilizes a high level of pattern recognition computational capacity. And you're using software that you built personally from scratch, on the fly. So you may take a tad longer to see the universe in that tree. The neurotypical sees the forest almost instantly, though he misses the trees and all the history of their beautiful interconnectedness. In contrast, the Asperger's forest, your forest, won't just be a forest. It will be a universe in which the trees in the forest commune. I would like you to join me today in discussing filtering, brain filtering. The neurotypical brain has a left temporal lobe, as do all brains, and this left temporal lobe of the neurotypical brain acts to filter information using its pre-installed software. The neurotypical is never conscious of this, and this is one of the key reasons why neurotypicals and Asperger's are very, very different. The neurotypical does not realize how much information is being automatically filtered out of his conscious awareness. So loads of information come in, but most is automatically thrown out. The neurotypical only sees a generalized overview of his conscious perception. Now, one thing that's unique in the Asperger brain is that the left temporal lobe is different. In the Asperger brain, the left temporal lobe does not strongly filter incoming information. The neurotypical brain hasn't the same pre-installed software. So, in summary, the neurotypical sees the forest instantly, but he misses the trees and all the history of their beautiful interconnectedness. The Asperger's forest won't just be a forest, it will be a universe in which the trees and the forest commune. Now we're going to pause for a deep breath before going to part 3. Now I would like to address the differences between the male and the female brains. Just like the Aspie brain is different from the neurotypical brain, the male brain is different from the female brain. They're different neurotypes. For example, after a stressful event, serotonin levels usually plummet for everyone, and this makes everyone feel depressed. The male Asperger, or the male in general, is able to replenish his serotonin on an average of 52% faster than females. So males are able to get over things more easily, and they're less prone to depression than their female counterparts. So for Asperger's, the males will generally have higher self-esteem, which comes in handy when you live in a world of neurotypicals. In fact, it's almost a requirement. So there are certain advantages to being a male Asperger compared to being a female Asperger. Now, would you say that neurotypicals were deficient in systematization? Probably not, because they're average, so they can't be deficient in anything by definition. On the other hand, would you say that an Asperger was deficient in social skills? Many neurotypicals would say yes, but the real truth is neither is deficient in any skill. They just have different neurotypes. Neurotypicals are skilled at social skills of the neurotypical. Asperger's are skilled at the social skills of the Asperger. Just because you don't have a certain skill that someone else has a skill at doesn't mean you're deficient. If I'm good at dancing and suck at music, and you're good at music and suck at dancing, do you think that I'm going to tell you that you're deficient in what I'm good at? No, of course not. You're just skilled at something else. Everybody has their gifts. So it's time for us to start realizing and accepting diversity in our world. And one of those diversities is the Asperger neurotype versus the neurotypical neurotype. Now, speaking of deficiencies, I would like to discuss 3 misnomers when it comes to the Asperger mind.